Let's do it.
Let's do it. Wonderful. Good evening, everyone. Wonderful to be here together, evening, nighttime, early morning time, wherever it might be. Pleased to welcome everyone to this, our most recent iteration of the IJSS Farbrengen series. Here at the IJSS, our mission is to advance scholarship and social transformation, bringing Jewish spiritual knowledge to bear on the toughest challenges of contemporary society. We break down the barriers between spheres of knowledge and practice, enabling long-term collaboration among scholars, social researchers, and human services practitioners. My name is Ariel Mays. I teach in the Religious Studies Department at Stanford, and I'm also the scholar in residence here at the IJSS. This evening, we're going to be looking sort of behind the scenes and under the cover of a particularly wonderful effort, a particularly wonderful book that came forth out of the IJSS. In 2019, Dr. Ellie Rubin and Michael Wexler inspired readers globally with their groundbreaking collaboration alongside the eminent sociologist Philip Wexler. The resulting work, Social Vision, the Lubavitcher Rebbe's transformative paradigm for the world, marked the first in-depth study of the seventh leader of Chabad's, his philosophy and of social change, and his engagement with the modern world's most pressing issues. Philip Wexler, of course, was Emeritus Professor of Sociology in the Unterberg Chair in Jewish Social and Educational History at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Before his death in 2023, he had previously served also as the Dean of the Margaret Warner Graduate School of Education and Human Development at the University of Rochester, and as the Director of Social Education at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He published an enormous number of books and articles on a staggering number of topics. With us this evening is Ellie Rubin, editor and research writer at Chabad.org, who holds a doctorate from the Department of Hebrew and Jewish Studies at University College London. He is a noted scholar of Hasidism, of Hasidic literature, of Jewish law, and teaches all over the world. Also with us this evening is Michael Wexler, the Associate Director of the IJSS, a Princeton University graduate with a degree in English literature, a Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing. Wexler has published 6 books of both fiction and nonfiction, including the acclaimed young adult fantasy series, The Seams. He served as an adjunct professor of writing at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and is the creator of projects for Fox, ABC, Microsoft, Aflac, Sirius XM Radio, and more. I think without further ado, I'm going to invite Michael and Ellie to join in conversation with each other and let us know a little bit more about this wonderful book project.
Well, thanks, Ariel, for that introduction. Big shoes to fill. I wanted to first acknowledge Philip, who can't be with us, obviously, passed away, our third author. And second of all, I wanted
I'd say
to,
our first author.
yeah, excuse me, our first author. He was really our inspiration. And I also wanted to acknowledge what we could call two different types of people maybe who are in the audience today. Philip, my father, was a big fan of William James, the theologian and philosopher, who posited that there were kind of two types of people, what he called once-borns, who were born into a tradition or had a paradigm or a hypothesis that they never questioned. And therefore, I wouldn't say everything was simple, but there was a sense to things. And then the twice-borns, who are those of us who have had to try to piece it together and figure it out along the way. So I suspect we have some from each camp here tonight. And I wanted to kind of jump right in and start with a question or two for Ellie. The first question being a very general question. You know, we hear a lot about Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah these days. It's more in vogue maybe than it used to be, right? Madonna's into it, Dennis Rodman, the basketball player, various celebrities. So I thought maybe we would start, Ellie, with your take on just, you know, what does Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah mean? What is that?
Okay, so the first question is always the hardest. The Talmud says, "Kol haschalas kashas," all beginnings are difficult. Um, so what is Kabbalah and what is Jewish mysticism? Many people will answer that in many different ways because Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism go back a very long way. They have a long history, and one of the things about history is that things keep changing. So, in broad terms, we can say that there's a tradition of Kabbalistic literature, which usually scholars will place it in the medieval period, medieval Spain, but it also stretches back further to rabbinic literature, to what's called the Hechalot literature, which takes us back really to the period of late antiquity. So Kabbalah is understood to be as ancient as Judaism itself, really. It's understood by itself, by its own tradition, by its own self-understanding. It is something that it is the inner dimension or the secret dimension of the Torah itself as transmitted to Moses at Sinai. And we have some key figures who figure in the literature and are sometimes portrayed as authors of the literature or who are authors of the literature. Most famously, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who's a rabbinic figure at the time, really around the period of the destruction of the Second Temple, lives in the land of Israel, and he's the hero of the Zohar, which is the primary work of Kabbalistic literature. Moving forward, we come eventually to Hasidism, or before that we have the Lurianic Kabbalah, which is the beginning of modern Kabbalah. So, that's really books and books have been written about so many different aspects of this history that, in this conversation, we really can't even begin to do justice. We'll fast forward to Hasidism and to Chabad Hasidism, where we have a few charismatic figures in the middle of the 18th century, so the 1750s thereabouts, 1740s, 1760s, who begin to coalesce into a mystical movement, which is not just at least one of the things that's happening, which is new, is that, and which Philip was particularly interested in, and which this book is particularly interested in. I'll just hold it up so everyone can see the book. Social Vision is that there's a social aspect, a social dynamic to this Kabbalistic mystical movement, which is one way of talking about it is simply that it was no longer as elitist as the study of Kabbalah had once been, and this is one of the contentious aspects about it, that there's this idea that Kabbalah can be popularized in some way. In order to do that, it might need to be simplified or it might not need to be simplified. That becomes a matter of debate within Hasidism itself, how exactly to go about this popularization. But there's this idea that the ideas of Kabbalah can be inspirational for regular people, for people who have day jobs. So before that time, you might have needed to be a very well a trained and learned scholar. Maybe you needed to be married. You needed to belong to some kind of small elite, what was called a klois, which was a kind of academy usually for married male scholars who would spend the week away from their wives, away from their families, studying Kabbalah, and only return to their families on Shabbat. And there were people associated with the Hasidic movement who started out in what was known as the Klois of Brody. I'm sure how to pronounce that. And you had other figures emerging from those same circles who were not so excited about Hasidism. They may have shared the same ideas and the same kind of knowledge of the Kabbalistic literature, but they weren't so enthusiastic about it becoming a source of popular inspiration, of popular ethos. So one thing that that's discussed in Social Vision, and which Philip would speak about a lot. Many times I discussed this with him, and almost every conversation about Hasidism with him, I think, would begin from this point, which was that there were two great scholars of Hasidism in the 20th century, Martin Buber and Gershom Scholem. And they had a debate about the nature of Hasidism, but Philip would always emphasize they both agreed, ultimately, that Hasidism is Kabbalah become ethos, which is to say that this body of teachings, this literature, had become not just a set of ideas about God, a theology, but it became an ethos, something that can inform life lived by regular people. It could become something with cultural power, with cultural meaning, in a way that was broader, that was not as elitist as before. So I think that's the place to begin when we want to talk about Kabbalah and Hasidism in the context of Philip's research and Philip's thinking about what Kabbalah and Hasidism is. It's bringing a kind of very esoteric, philosophical, mystical set of concepts which relate to God and implanting them in real life, in life as lived by regular human beings, and thereby lifting up ordinary life, resacralizing or re-enchanting, bringing a sense of holiness, a sense of enchantment, a sense of specialness to ordinary life.
That makes sense. Our talk today had said, how can we bring Jewish spirituality to bear, as you just discussed, that this could be relevant to regular people's lives. So not getting deep too quickly. I mean, I know there's more context that we could talk about, but I did want to ask you, and I know you have some questions for me, but there were a few things I wanted to go through with you tonight. Some of the pillars, if you will, of this tradition that give us a way of looking at the world, right? So I to start with a very simple second question, which is, what is your take, or talk to us about the basic belief of, all of us who are here tonight, why is man here, right? What is our mission in the cosmos? What is our mission in this world? I promised easy questions, so I'm delivering.
What is the meaning of life?
Well, no,
what is the meaning of existence?
we know that one of the beliefs is that the world was made intentionally imperfect, right? And that it was man's responsibility in some sense to complete it in this belief system.
Right. So now we're coming to what I think what you're pointing towards is one of the ideas that's discussed at some length in social vision is an idea of reciprocity, of mutual exchange, which isn't just a social idea about the connection between people, relationships between people, but it's also a religious idea, a theological idea about the relationship between man and God, that there's a reciprocal relationship between humanity and God. This is an idea, again, which is very old. There's the one of the fundamental, especially if we look at, let's say, Lurianic Kabbalah in the early modern period, we have this idea that, and it's earlier as well, again, I'm generalizing here, but we have this idea that human activity has an effect on God. So the Lurianic Kabbalists talk a lot about how doing a mitzvah, performing one of the ritual commandments mandated by the Torah, let's say eating kosher food or keeping Shabbat, or putting on tefillin, etc., right? We have 613 of them, so the list can be very long, although not very many of them are actually operative in this historical era, but I think it's less than 100, really.
But a mitzvah can be simple as well, right?
Yeah.
Helping an old lady across the street.
Yeah, exactly, helping an old lady across the street. But the Kabbalists had this idea that it's not just an action that we're doing down here, it's an action that has an effect upon God himself, that God is in some way disconnected from himself, that God's own unity is fractured through the process of creation, and that in order for God to be made complete, in order for God's different aspects, as it were, different modes of divine manifestation to cohere, for them to come together, for God's own self to be repaired and whole, that requires us to mend the fissures of the world itself through ordering the world in such a manner as prescribed by the biblical commandments, by the commandments of the Torah.
Right.
So this is again, it's an old idea, and in fact, the Rebbe, the seventh Chabad Rebbe, who is the main subject, the main hero of social vision, he would often anchor this idea in a midrashic text from Bereshit Rabbah, which is an old rabbinic, fairly ancient rabbinic commentary to the Bible, commenting on a passage after God has finished creating the world. It says, "Vayichulu hashamayim v'haaretz." God completed the heaven and earth, and it continues describing what He did. Asher bara elokim lasos, all that God created, lasos, to make. So commenting on this lasos, to make, which is in the future tense, we're talking about God having just completed creating the world, and finishing that account, the Torah says that He made all this stuff to do in the future. The Medrash gives this parable of, I don't remember all the details, but basically how the world is created in such a manner that bread doesn't sprout out of the ground ready baked. What sprouts out of the ground is wheat, and human beings need to grind the wheat, need to make it into flour, then make dough, etc., and only then can you put it in the oven. And then finally, after all the input of humankind, the wheat becomes freshly baked bread. Right? So that this parable is supposed to give us an idea of the cosmos itself as providing us a bunch of resources. God created a complete world. It's complete in its resources. It's not complete in its ultimate. It hasn't come to its ultimate. Or let's introduce another word: messianic telos. It hasn't come to its ultimate purpose, its ultimate fulfillment. That has to be done. That's lasos. That is yet to be done by humankind.
Right. Let me interrupt you for 1 minute, and then if you want to ask me anything, we'll see how much I know about anything. But
can I ask you something now?
Well,
okay, go ahead. I don't want to break your flow.
You're not breaking my flow. My question is, let me ask my question. It's a quickie. I just wanted to know, when you say the word God, exactly what do you mean?
Oh yeah, easy.
We can come back to that if you want.
Well, actually, nothing can be said about God, so that's definitely an easy enough to answer that one.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, let's say a few things, but the first thing I'll say is you can't say anything. So really, everything I'm saying is an approximation, or really a failure to say what really should be said, right? So
I think the word has a lot of baggage, right? Like when you hear God, I think a lot of people, twice born especially, were thinking like, okay, the old man in the white robes in the throne.
Right, the one who figures in New Yorker cartoons.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So right, so that's obviously not what you mean, but it's very hard to explain what you mean. I get it.
Right. Well, one of the things that the Kabbalah does is that it has quite a lot to say, both about the way that God is manifest in the world, and about the way God transcends the world, and about trying to bridge the gap between divine transcendence and divine manifestation. And it has a lot to one of the things that Kabbalah does is it tries to create a language with which to talk about God. There were many Jewish philosophers, medieval philosophers like Maimonides, who really didn't want to talk about God at all, because to do so is always to fail, is always to use human language, which by nature applies to human beings, things that we know in the world, and God ultimately is the source. We know we can say a few things about God in relation to the world. God is the creator of the world, right? We can say that, but that doesn't really tell you anything about God. It's like saying somebody, describing a person by their day job, right? That's not really who they are. Their spouse or their best friend knows them in a much more intimate way. So describing God as creator is it's true, but it is a kind of failure of imagination, right? And having limited imagination is always going to fail.
What was your question for me?
Okay,
We can
so
come back to this one.
I
know
wanted
you're
to
just
ask
getting
a question.
started.
I wanted to ask a question about the question that you used as the invitation to this conversation, which was, how can Jewish spiritual traditions help us survive the modern world? So I want to ask you a question about that, and maybe like part of my question is going to be like, what were you thinking there? What are some of the premises of the question, and how can we respond to those premises? And maybe through that, we might actually come to some kind of answer that actually responds to that question, because so far we're talking very generally, but maybe this will kind of redirect us. So how can Jewish spiritual traditions help us survive the modern world? So what I see that what jumps out at me is two phrases within that question: spiritual traditions on the one hand, and the modern world on the other hand. And it seems to me that you're kind of setting up a juxtaposition between them, and maybe more specifically, tradition versus modern and spiritual versus world. So my question to you is, could you unpack those juxtapositions for us a little bit? Am I right to say that that's what's lying behind your question? And if the assumption that they should be contrasted to one another, if that these are kind of what's the word? Antithetical to one another. Exactly, antithetical.
From the UK.
Is that how can we begin to go about undoing that assumption? First, tell us about the assumption. Why would we assume that, and how can we go about undoing that assumption?
That's all one question?
Yeah.
I guess there's there is an assumption there, right? And the assumption there is that there's some sort of that various philosophies, whether it's Norse mythology or Jewish mysticism, have this that there's a treasure chest, right, over the rainbow that holds jewels in it that we can grab, that can help us survive something or help us navigate something that is very fraught, or that there is this ancient wisdom or secrets or hidden treasures and ideas that maybe we can find that'll help us like unlock our day-to-day existences. So there is a polarity there. Now, maybe you're talking about the day when there isn't a polarity there, right? There's something, what's it called? The singularity, which is, I guess, this terrifying day that's just been moved back a little closer to us, when artificial intelligence is no longer able to be controlled by humans. But when I say singularity, I mean a time when the spiritual dimension and the worldly dimension are confluent, and there's not so much of like, I got to find something from here to operate there. One of our guests tonight, Steve Chudnik, who's also a scholar, he and I have always talked about Norse mythology, and I can't quite remember the name. I think it's called Birost or Bifrost. It's a burning rainbow bridge that connects the Midgard, I think it is, which is the regular Earth, to Asgard, which is a higher plane, right? So it's like trying to pull, and Philip Wexler, you know, who is the author of this book as well, always talked about this bridge, right? Trying to bring the sacred and the divine across the bridge to the secular. So that's how I'm seeing the title. Now, how can that be undone and transmigrated and things and those two things not be at odds anymore? Well, you know, what do you think? That's
Right.
another question, and you talked about messianism. You know, dare I even raise that word, because that's even scarier than God, right? The Messiah, because again, we're waiting for someone to walk out of the woods and wave wands.
Is it scarier though?
Well, I'm speaking, you know, my job in the book, for those of you who maybe didn't notice, was I was instructed by the powers that be when working with Ellie and my father Philip, who was an academic, that I was pulled aside into a telephone booth in an alley and told in whispers, make sure it's in English. So, is it scary? In a sense, it is, if it's not properly explained. But why isn't it scary?
Right. So let's just go a few steps back and talking about this bridge between the. I think there's two bridges really which are implied in your question. One is between the past, the ancient, and the modern, and the other is between the physical world, the world that we inhabit, and the spiritual realm. And I think one of the things that Philip really kind of honed in on, maybe this is really his biggest contribution or his most central, like conceptual contribution to understanding the Hasidic message, is that he saw, whereas most people understood that the social dimension is something which is purely terrestrial, right? Something down here. The social is like people in the world. And the spiritual is something else entirely, the opposite of that. The spiritual is to leave society. The mystic is the one who retreats from society, goes into the wood. You talked about the Messiah coming out of the woods, but the mystic is the guy who goes into the woods to commune with nature or that which is beyond nature. The mystic is held in opposition to the social, to the society.
Yeah,
and
well,
Philip's intervention was to say that when we look at Hasidism, we see something else happening. And what we see in Hasidism is that the mystic is among the people, and that the mystical experience occurs among the people through community, through a social effervescence. That was a term that he borrowed from Durkheim, the great father of sociology, who I think in Philip's hierarchy of authorities was only second to Weber, right? It goes Weber, Durkheim, and then the Lubavitcher Rebbe. I think that's in Philip's.
Yeah, but we have a question, Ellie, when you're done.
Okay, we have a question from the.
Yeah, question in the chat. Can we get into some specific issues? What are you trying to say? This isn't specific.
Okay.
Education that.
So let's first of all, let's just talk for a minute about this idea about the social and the spiritual, because this is like the bridge between the impractical, the theory, and the practice, right? The first point is that the spiritual, the divine, is not accessed through leaving the world or through moving out of the social sphere, but it's rather achieved through the embodied social life, through living in community, through being part of a community, through reciprocal exchange between people. And that is where the spiritual dimension happens. The way to go outside of yourself, to go beyond the self, is not by leaving other people behind. It's actually the way to enlarge the self, to go beyond the self, to enter into a spiritual kind of mode of living is to connect with other people, to give to other people, to find ways to receive and give and receive and give in turn, right? And that creates something, an experience, a shared experience that exceeds the sum of its parts, that goes beyond itself, that allows a person to be more than what they would be alone, right? So the mystic who goes into the woods alone can never really hope to become anything more than they were previously. That's not going to change them. That's not going to transform them. What's going to transform a person and make them become greater, better, more powerful, more advanced as a human being, more developed as a human being, is through engaging, through participating in
Yeah, well,
sharing.
sorry, I'm interrupting you.
Go ahead.
No, I wanted to let I wanted to open up the floor because we have some questions here. So if our tech wizard Denise is still awake in Israel, we can unmute people. Ariel, did you have a specific and I know Garth has a question as well. But Ariel, did you have a specific you wanted to talk about some of the real life social questions or real life ideas that are talked about in the book? So what did you have a specific one in mind? I know we talk about education, we talk about social justice, we talk about eco-mysticism. There is a lot of tangible stuff. Of course, we love opining on the mystical.
Well, I think one of the great lessons of the book is that the mystical, the spiritual are grounded in the stuff of daily life. And that's exactly, I think, Ellie, what you're speaking to, which is that the questions that the book grapples with are not simply these meta questions or these broader, more abstract questions, of which obviously there's great consequence, but how do these help us be greater agents of compassion in the world? How do they change our behavior in the world? How do they help us understand the complex questions of human society? And I think one of the strengths of the book, and one of the things that I've always loved so much about it, is the fact that it really takes up these questions about what's the nature of education? How can the Hasidic tradition, how can Jewish mystical traditions, how can Jewish spiritual traditions, however we want to frame that, or all of the above and then some, help us be better educators, think about education more thoughtfully? How can they help us grapple with questions of the climate crisis and environmental ethics, prison reform? Can you speak to perhaps some of the highlights of the way in which the book makes contributions there? And are there other issues that you wish you could have included or you would like to include now?
Well, I'll take up education quickly because these are all, each one of these questions is big, and I'll take up education, and then Ellie can speak to the prison reform and incarceration, which is a topic of our next for Brigham, because the tradition had some very interesting ideas on that. But in a nutshell, the education piece, Hasidic and Jewish mystical traditions are very focused on a different mindset for education. In other words, education should not be preparatory in the sense of like, you need to know your multiplication tables, but it should be preparatory in terms of how to live. What is your belief system? What are your ideas? What are your ethics? What is your morality, if you were? And a different model of education that is just focused in a different place, right? Preparing the whole person. I guess whole person education is a more secular phrase that talks about this. So that's one thing. And then we can all debate and talk about what things go in that bucket, right? So if we shift away from math and science, and I'm not saying you shouldn't know what a paramecium is or something like that, but maybe that's not number one priority. So that's a thought on education and prison reform. The way that the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who is really a spokesperson of Jewish mysticism, saw punishment and incarceration was also very interesting. I mean, he felt obviously that it was actually rooted in the education piece, right? That we're focused in our current society, we're always trying to, and I guess we see all the pharmaceutical ads, so it's the same thing. We're always trying to cure the symptom. We're symptom focused instead of root cause focused. So it's the same thing. But Ellie, maybe you want to just mention the interesting idea that the Rebbe said that the
I just
Torah
want to
doesn't
first pick
allow
up,
for incarceration. That it's
right.
just that it's absolutely that it's just not viable. Actually, he said at one point, like you can put someone to death or you can impose a fine, but you can't incarcerate someone.
Right. So let me just pick up on the point you just made a moment before about the connection between education and criminal justice reform. And it really goes even deeper. You know, the Chabad's organization, its central organization to this day in Hebrew is called Merkaz Le'inyanei Chinuch, the Center for Education Issues. And that was a name that was given in the 1940s when Chabad first began to establish itself in America as its central location. Chabad was already in America before, but as its central headquarters. So education was always a major preoccupation of the Rebbe. And he did see it as the most central, seminal thing in shaping a society. And the key, at one point, he wrote a memo. This was in the 1970s, when Carter ran for president on a platform of creating an independent Department of Education. So we have a whole chapter in the book devoted to the Rebbe's discussions of education, a lot of which includes this whole historical context and the Rebbe's role in that. And he gave many public talks supporting Carter's domestic agenda in this regard. And it was a very fraught issue. There was a pitched battle in Congress. You know, the same kind of thing that happens every day now, right? Were there going to be enough votes and so on? And one of the Rebbe gave out a memo at that time saying that creating an independent Department of Education will send a message to the nation and to all the other nations of the world about the values of America, and it will strengthen America on every front. American society will be strengthened, and all he says the money that will be invested in an independent Department of Education will be saved in all the other areas, in healthcare, in the criminal justice system, in defense. Right, that's one of the interesting ones, including because he says if people see that America is a healthy society with a strong educational system at its core, and it's providing education for everybody, and especially if it sees that education has a strong moral foundation and creates a strong sense of social cohesion amongst the entire population, nobody will want to attack America. They'll understand that this is a strong nation, a united nation, a United States, and so will not need. So the expenditure on defense will not need to be as much, right? And he says the same thing will be in all kinds of other things. People will live longer, healthier lives because they'll feel better about themselves. They'll care for each other better. They'll have a stronger sense of identity.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
And then bringing that particularly to the criminal justice piece. On several occasions, he spoke about the role of education in, like you said, there are two ways to think about education. Is education kind of utilitarian? Is it there to prepare you to make money, to serve, to play a role in the economy and be successful as an individual? Or is education supposed to give you a set of values which inspire you to contribute to society, to make the society better, to help others? And that distinction is what sets up a person to either become a criminal, potentially, or to become a person who is the opposite of a criminal, somebody who's a healthy member of society, a contributing member of society, somebody who's looking out for other people. And another dimension of this is he talks about kind of the opportunity for crime often comes when people are educated or not educated in a way that makes them entitled. So wealthier people, a more affluent person with a better so-called education, a supposedly better education, might end up being more of a criminal personality than a poorer person who actually has less opportunity to commit crimes because they don't have the resources to do so. And also, a poorer person who has been aided by others might feel more grateful to society and less entitled. So that sets them up to actually be better citizens, right? So the whole calculus of what education is, what it's for, is different if we think about it in, let's say, the socio-mystical terms that Philip sets
Ellie,
out in. Yeah.
I have to interrupt you. Just because we have limited time. I did want to do audience questions, but maybe right before from people who are in our Farbringen, I shouldn't say audience, it was one big party. But I wanted to, Ariel, did you want to say one word? Because we have our Stanford expert here. We touched on prison reform, we touched on education, but can you say, and then we'll turn it over to questions, but can you just say a word, since this is your wheelhouse, so to speak, about what this tradition has to say about ecology and environmentalism, which is, as Ellie says, we shouldn't draw this distinction, but it does seem strange for ancient wisdom to be talking about such a foregrounded thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's one of those cases in which, because Jewish mystical traditions predate the contemporary industrial carbon economy, they remind us that the world as it is not the world as it must be, and that there are alternative ways of organizing our society, of thinking about governance, of evaluating natural resources, that is to say, assigning value to them, and also to understanding that the world is not a static object, but rather a subject that we live together with. And that's true of the animals, that's true of the more than human world, it's true of the human world, it's true of the natural world, all. And so one of the great lessons of Hasidism, at least as I understand it, is that Alles is Gott, to use a repercussive phrase found in Chabad. Everything is God. And if everything is divinity, that's a radical different way of thinking about stones and rocks and grizzly bears and cutthroat trout and everything in between. And I think one of the things that I think about a lot these days, and this is a question that I would then, let's say, recycle back to you, which is for those of us who are living outside of a Hasidic community, and also for those of us who hope to see bigger change in the world outside of just the Jewish community, how do we look to what is, in some sense, if we might think about it in a sort of like first glance, feels very parochial, very closed, very restricted. How do we think with the traditions of Hasidism to grapple with these big human questions? I think that's one of the great overtures of the book, and also one of the great innovations of Chabad and of the Seventh Rebbe in particular.
Do you want to hold off on answering that, Ellie? And we'll take some questions, or do you want to give a brief?
That's great. I don't think
it's a great question.
Yeah.
Maybe do a question roundup, question harvest.
Yeah, so we can come back around to that. Go ahead, Ariel. You're our expert moderator.
I think we can throw it open.
Yeah. Any questions from anyone else? Just feel free to jump in. I think, Denise, I guess you can unmute everybody, and or anyone who wants to ask a question can raise their hand or one of those fancy things.
Drop them into the chat if that's easier.
Yeah, or drop them into the chat. We do have one. Any questions up there?
Michael, when we were talking earlier today, you said that you wanted to ask a question about the Messiah.
Oh,
And he said we were
I already sort of asked that.
yeah, but I didn't really answer it. So if you want to ask it again, or you asked it in a different way, so I didn't really. If you wanna go there again, we could go there again. I think the Messiah is always a nice place to end because it's the ultimate telos. So it's the ending of everything.
You want to look in the chat, Ellie, and see if there's any other questions you want to address? Garth has.
I see God's question, but it's not anything that we addressed in the book, except to say that one thing that maybe is relevant.
A longer conversation. That's another conversation.
Yeah, and it's also not a topic that I've researched that in any depth. But one thing I will say is that the Rebbe did repeatedly in these contexts talk about the collective Jewish community as being able to help all other Jews everywhere in the world, especially in the land of Israel, through living better lives themselves, through engaging in Torah study, through engaging in more mitzvahs. So these are activities, as we said before, a healing of the world, a greater perfection was is achieved through our daily lives. We're not political figures who have the power to make these kinds of decisions. So in a way, it's kind of useless for us to even think and debate them. It's probably more worthwhile for us to take up our little corner of the world and try and make it better. And in the belief, in the socio-mystical belief that we are all interconnected, that the world is connected in a way that if one corner of the world is made better, is made more perfect, then and more peaceful, then another corner of the world will also become better and more peaceful.
Are there any other questions? I am curious about Ariel's question about how these how we can interact with these teachings when we see Hasidic people, so to speak, it's sort of, in their own communities and set off from the world. But let's see if anyone else has questions if you have a question, you can drop it in the chat or raise your hand.
There have certainly been different interpretations of Hasidism and different ways that contemporary Hasidim have chosen to apply those teachings in the world. So there are Hasidic communities that have chosen a kind of more enclave existence where they have tried to some degree, wall themselves off from the larger society and just kind of create their own like mini utopia within their own within their own neighborhoods. And there's the Chabad model, which has been to reach out beyond its own enclave and to concern itself with the world at large. Somebody raised their hand, so maybe I can stop talking and we'll take.
Anne and Tony, can you guys talk, or can we unmute?
Yeah, well, something that I can't say exactly what it is in the conversation that you guys have been having, but at a certain point, something just occurred to me, which is supposing you're looking out at the world and you see somebody who's in real need, and so you decide you've got to do something about it. Well, that person has just changed you because you weren't about to help that person in that way, and we're going to assume that they're embedded in some sort of a social situation, all that. They're poor, they're being discriminated against, whatever it is. And so you've changed because your heart has been touched, and you're moved to do something about it. And in moving to do something about it, something that what you're going to do is going to change them in response, because it's reciprocal. They have moved you and changed you, and in the act of doing something about the situation that concerns them, and perhaps giving them hope, inspiration, a light about a way out, you've changed them, and perhaps this question just arises out of the dynamic of what you guys have been saying. It's not a question I would have asked an hour ago, but I'm asking it now.
Well, I'll jump in real quickly on that. I mean, the idea of reciprocity, which is part and parcel of mysticism, is pretty interesting, Tony. And it's exactly like you say. And there's an idea there that nobody is just a giver, and nobody is just a recipient. And there's also an idea that being a recipient of help is just as important as being a provider of help. And there's a line, I can't remember it, Ellie, something to the effect of that the pauper gives to the householder more than the householder gives to the pauper. If I'm getting that right, which is, and so like you said, Tony, I mean, I don't know, I find it interesting, the idea of like that receiving is as important as giving, and that's where the distinction between rich and poor gets kind of chucked to the side, right? Because nobody's really
to a certain degree.
Poor.
Right. Yeah, there is that idea that about how a person can only truly be happy by giving to others. And so by default, what that means is that to be able to make yourself vulnerable enough to accept a gift, to accept help, that is to give somebody else the gift of allowing them to help you, right? So you're giving somebody else fulfillment by being a recipient. So there's this I wouldn't say the difference is erased, but the dynamic is changed, is transformed if you look at it in this way.
Yeah, good question. Let's see. Oh, this is a great question by Dr. Chudnik here. And this is something I was going to ask also, and you touched on it, Ellie. For someone who doesn't have a lot of background knowledge of the Hasidic or Jewish mystical traditions to fully understand our book, I think you can, even if you don't. But what would you say for, what are some, if you were to name 3 key texts that a quote unquote regular person could read or should read as a 101 or 201 for these ideas, where would you send them?
That's a great idea, a great question. And I think what I'll do is I'll actually recommend Ariel's book, because Ariel has authored edited an anthology, which is a really great anthology of Hasidic texts called Hasidism, Writings on Devotion, Community, and Life in the Modern World. So that also chimes with our theme, life in the modern world.
Will you drop that in the chat, Ellie?
Yeah. Just a moment.
And then maybe like some of the classics, no?
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is that this book collects from a lot of the classics, and it's also translated into English, and it has some very nice introductions. It's organized by theme, so it's a really great reader to dip into. Obviously, the classic of Chabad thought is the Tanya, and that's also accessible. You can find it online in translation. You can find it with lots of classes, but to some degree, that's a heavier read. It's, it's the first section is 53 chapters. They're short chapters, but it's 53 chapters, So it's definitely a book I would recommend to anyone. But it might take a little more. It might take a little more commitment, right? So, but it's
what's that
Chabadniks
title
had
again?
the cost. The Tanya.
Can you put it in the chat?
I'll put it in the chat. I could even put
Appreciate
a link.
Yep.
I'll put a link also to the online Tanya with translation.
I have a good one. I have a good one too. That's more of a video.
Yeah. So the link that I just put in has translations, essays on the Tanya, classes on the Tanya, video, audio, what you name it. Any way that you want to kind of get into it, you could find at that site.
I have one more, Ellie.
Chabad.org/Tanya. Yeah.
I have one more that's kind of fun to watch, and we're about to wrap up, so maybe another question or two if there are any. But so we call this the Verbringen series, and the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who we wrote the book about, who again is part of a larger tradition, would have these get-togethers or parties or kind of mystical experiences called Verbringens, right? It's a bunch of people coming together to learn together. Usually there was a lot of vodka involved, which from what I can tell, but if you want to watch some of these videos and see this guy talk, he's very relatable. You know what I'm saying? And you can see that there's a genius here. And it's not all about, it's not some weird religious stuff that you're like, what is he talking about? I got this link. I think this is it.
The Farbrengen series.
Yeah, and there's about let's see if that
Yeah.
should be the right link.
That link, yeah, that's a great link. Yeah.
Doesn't look clickable for some reason, but maybe it is to everybody else. And in there,
Yeah, just,
watch all of
just
these
copy
things.
and paste it into a browser.
You missed the H on the TTP.
Oh, thank you.
That's why.
You're brilliant. I'll try that again.
Yeah, so that link is videos of the Rebbe actually Farbrengen leading Hasidic
It's amazing.
gatherings.
It is really like, it's pretty wild stuff. It's pretty wild stuff. And that's why, and then we have one last question, but that's why this Jewish mysticism stuff, to be, you know, from someone who came at the book from a slightly more secular standpoint was intriguing, because this is not like going to temple and being bored, right? Or going to church and being like, oh my God, you know, what is going on here? I can't wait to get out of here. I mean, this is some ecstatic stuff. Okay, Ann and Tony.
Okay, I have it's not really a question, I guess it's a comment, but
I think we're losing your internet a little.
spirituality, I guess, Judaism. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
We can hear
Can
you
you hear me?
now.
Okay, our
Mhm.
internet is not here. The traditional concept that God is perfect. So I'm just fascinated by this reciprocal concept that God, the mystery, whatever we want to call it, is really has to be perfected by the input of humans. And more time, more about it.
I think we're losing you a little bit, but we're kind of up on 9 p.m. So if Ariel is still around, maybe he'll close things out for us, and we'll we have our next Farbrengen coming up. Thanks,
Yeah.
Dr. Chudnik.
It's
Ariel.
a great question. This notion
It's a
of
great
God being in need of human action.
Yeah.
Cardinal dimensions of the Kabbalistic tradition, going all the way back to the time of Nachmanides, and it's spun out in different directions by different thinkers. Perhaps that could be a topic for a future Farbrengen. But the next one's already planned. And so please come back for episode 5. It's entitled Radical Hasidism, a dialogue about restorative justice. It'll be taking place on Sunday, March 17th from 10 to 11 a.m. I don't know, is that West Coast time? I assume so.
I think it's noon. I think it's noon Eastern, and that's going to be fascinating because we have a lane leader. Well, we have one Chabad person, and we have a lane leader joining us who wrote an amazing book called My Life with Lifers. And she's been literally inside of prisons doing, you know, work with, you know, people on death row and spirituality. It's going to be really interesting on Sunday the 17th. Yeah.
So look forward to seeing you all again there. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Ellie, for coming to share your wisdom with us today. And we will look forward to our next event together as we build this community space. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you. Bye.
Excellent. Bye.